Chris, welcome in everybody watching this live or as a part of a highlight. Like and sub if you feel like it earns it, but beyond that call to action, I'm generally curious because we just finished talking about WoW's classic servers, and we in our last live show we were talking about New World and its recent surge, and essentially kind of predicting essentially what might be coming next. But today is interesting because one of the things, there's kind of two mindsets within the New World community, and it's around the concept of what's called a fresh start server, meaning everybody starts fresh, no transfer into the servers themselves. And it looks like the New World devs are going to go in that direction, and maybe around the time of either the 1 year anniversary or with Brimstone Sands as a launching event. And this kind of ties in greatly with what Chad was talking about in the previous video with streamers. New World's been known, especially because there's integration with Twitch, to team up with big streamers. There's also Asmongold, who loves New World, and so getting him on board isn't any kind of issue. But getting also other big streamers,
big swords that are like, yes, great,
great swords. That's why we're kind of laughing about in an earlier show. Like, do you think they added that? Like, they're like, wait a minute, what would get the balding man back into this game? But the fresh start server is an interesting kind of problem and solution all rolled into itself, because the question that I have is that, and they haven't detailed out their plan. They just said, hey, we like the idea too, we're going to reveal more information here in the coming weeks. That's really the message, is that more information and details are coming. But what I want to kind of get your perspective on, especially as a New World player, but as somebody who has not yet hit level cap, the original launch of New World was exciting. And essentially, I think that's the idea behind the request for Fresh Start, at least from my perspective, is to recreate that experience. There's nobody there who's an experienced level 60 character controlling the land. You do have experience that's built in here, but you're redoing that entire process from scratch. Does that presents to me like, okay, well, how long is it a fresh start server? How long are you going to prevent transfers, to that server? Otherwise, would that server eventually just collapse when people have that fresh start experience and then decide not to play or go back to their original characters that they've already put that investment in? What concerns do you have? What positive thoughts do you have when it comes to this update?
So you can never recreate the true past, because part of the benefit of the past is nobody knew what was happening. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have some people who want to go back and do it better, and those people are going to rock those servers, right? You go create a character on there and you play optimally from day one, you can achieve all sorts of things. And so we see this in a lot of these remakes, remasters, classics, whatever people want to call them, is people go back and they go in with all of today's knowledge and today's skill levels, and they go play then's challenges and they blow through them. So it's not going to be a recreation, but putting all of these players back in those zones does make those zones that maybe don't have as much usefulness now, makes those really fun. The clamor for early resources, the clamor for early zones, the clamor for early quests. It's really fun to walk up to a quest giver and there be 3, 4, 10 people standing around it. It's not fun when it's 600 and you can't click the quest giver, but there is a balance in between where it's better when it's not just me. And that's kind of neat, right? When you're hunting that boar or chopping down that tree, to see other people off in the distance doing things is kind of fun. And it makes New World feel really alive. So I think new servers and kind of funneling people onto those is good. If nobody ever played games with their friends, it would be really easy, because you would basically just shove everybody who logs in today for the first time into the same place. Where that starts to fall apart is then you join tomorrow and you want to play with me. Well, my server's full now and you're on tomorrow's server. And so that starts to kind of break that down. But on its own, it would be really nice, especially if you could look far into the looking glass and say, okay, in addition to that, we're going to take today's players and we're going to break them apart. The ones who just want to try the game and the ones who are really going to be here a year from now. But you don't know that, because it is really fun to play with somebody who started the same time as you, that has the same goals and objectives as time has passed. So I don't know how they do that. I think that New World has like a living world. So for anybody that isn't familiar with New World, as opposed to Final Fantasy or World of Warcraft, you actually kind of own part of the world as a team. So it'd be like your Final Fantasy Grand Company owning it, or World of Warcraft. It would be like if faction PvP had an even greater effect on even the greatest effect it's had across the years. And that's something that when you go to start doing server merges and stuff is really hard to do well. They have a system for it, but like it would be better if there just weren't server merges. Like that would that would be better. So they kind of created that problem. So I don't know how that works with these fresh start worlds as they inevitably go through the same attrition that other ones did. And how do they balance the disparity between alt characters and truly fresh starts?
Yeah, that's actually something that somebody even suggested, and I was like, oh man, they said that in order to try and even, or to start a character on a fresh start, that you should be required to delete your existing characters. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to be a requirement at all. Like if you have an extra character slot, like go ahead and just make it. But even still, if they deleted it, you can't delete that core knowledge, right?
Right.
But there could be, and actually, like when you start to talk about segmentation, there could be the idea that it's like brand new accounts, brand new server, and only brand new accounts go to said brand new server, which you still probably would get someone who maybe spins up an alternate account. And then can have that knowledge. But ultimately, imagine if you have a new marketing push and it's like, hey, people who've never created a character at all, they get this. This is their server for them that we're gonna funnel them to. They could choose maybe to go to another server, but just like I said in the last episode, when they did their free weekend, they spun up free weekend servers specifically for the free to play players, and maybe essentially that could be that kind of experience that you could have to ensure that you're having this as pure of an experience as humanly possible, that within the given constraints. And then essentially also then for players who are veterans to say, hey, yeah, and there's a veteran new fresh start server for you guys who want that competition, that initial land rush, that initial like war for New World. And then they could even, honestly though, like the biggest concern I have within any of this is that as soon as they announce the fresh start servers, streamers go, hey, this is where we're going to be, right? They
Yep.
sit here and they lock in on the server. And then if you wanted that fresh start server and you're not a streamer, like, what are you going to do? There is an opportunity of being hung out to dry when it comes down to that.
I think what you described makes me long for a choose your own adventure type system for MMOs, where basically there's different ways to play, right? And so I've already created a character, so now I can create a veteran character on this challenge server, or I can create one that is meant for fresher characters to have a variety of experiences, or there's one meant for truly new people where it checks either my IP address or my purchase history or whatever, and I'm not eligible for, so that door's closed. And then I could choose among my doors for what I want. And so it'd say, hey, these servers are available to you, these servers are not. And then you could pick. And so maybe as a new player that you truly are new, you're like, yeah, I am new, but I want to play with Brian. It's like, I don't want to go through the new door. So the new door is open for me, but I'm not interested. I think that would be really neat. And then that would really, like, once you have that mindset, you could open it up to other things. Why are there not doors for hardcore servers where if you die, you're dead? Why are there not doors for limited time servers where it's who can make it in 30 days or less? And then the server is going to die. And so we're just going to reset it. So who wants to be a part of that? And so like, servers that it's all PvP based. And so we've skewed all the quests to be PvP only, and you are always PvP flagged. So like you could start to manipulate these servers to have different rule sets because within New World, you choose PvE flagged or PvP. But what if a server just had that predetermined? Everybody on the server is PvE. There will be no PvP. So the land is going to change ownership through a different system.
Yeah.
And so you could start to really kind of mod the game into these servers that all function as different iterations of themselves. Because I think a PvE only hardcore server sounds like a totally different New World experience.
Oh yeah. Well, and this is something that I've even advocated for within the world of Final Fantasy XIV. Yoshi P has talked about the demand for that die-hard core like MMO experience isn't enough business to justify an MMO for it. And my counter argument was like, well, could you just like dedicate a server, just like how we unofficially dedicated Balmung originally as the roleplay server? Couldn't you just dedicate a server that it's like, all right, all the enemies out in the open world, they can murder you. Like there's no like solo experience, etc. That's this server that, and that's your experience. And so when you talk about a hardcore PvE server, like that would be a whole new, experience. But on that note, when it comes to the reality then of the player base, imagine getting yourself killed and being frustrated. That would have to be some kind of seasonal thing, right? Like, okay, we're putting this content out. It's going to be a limited time run on this hardcore mode, and we're going to go and see who can do these crazy things, right? You know,
give account-wide cosmetics or something at the end of the season and then delete it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Asteria, sorry for butchering your name, in chat saying like Final Fantasy 11 to 14. Yes, exactly that very thing where like to go out into the world is always a risk, and so you would want to always party up. But again, that would be a specific server. In my mind, when it comes down to that mindset, it's really put up or shut up. That's the message that I'm sending out into the world, because generally speaking, I hear a lot of people say they want those things, but then do their actions actually then reflect?
Oh, it's scary when you actually create a hardcore character.
Oh yeah, like wait a minute, no?
My brother's been doing hardcore Diablo 2, and like in our group, people are like, hardcore servers, hardcore. He never asked for it, and then he went and created a hardcore character, and his first time he got to level 30, and his second time he got to level 50, and then he eventually got to where he could beat it. So he did it. So I think it took him 3 characters to be able to kind of get through Diablo 2. And you don't actually hit, I don't think he actually hit 99. I think he was up in like the early 90s, but he got way up there to where he kind of had all the items he wanted, and he was in a good spot, but it took him several tries. And that's a neat experience. I don't know how you document that and how you reward it.
Yeah.
But for a game that has struggled with server merges, I think the system they have for server merges is the best solution to the problem they created. The problem they created was a solution to a problem that most games just live with. So like, I'm not saying that spinning up more servers was a bad idea. Most games don't do it simply because they can't. It always seemed to be the issue, but it turns out that nobody had been off into that distant frontier with unlimited server access. And that it turns out if you just spin up servers every time you get asked for one, that creates a new problem that nobody has a solution for because no other game has been able to do it. And so they had to create a solution where they merge those servers down, and you either over reward the act of getting merged, and then people want to be the one that got merged. Please delete my world, or you underdo it. It's like, oh, they deleted my world, and you're just going to push that balance. There's no way you land on the middle for everybody.
A part of the fix
so had to navigate that.
A part of the fix in this regards, especially for New World though, is cross server play, because ultimately at the end of the day, if you can just play the game, a lot of people actually probably would prefer a smaller base population server. I know many people were like, yeah, 600 to 800 people, that's a great amount. I feel like I can gather. It's a good group. But because certain content requires a population to pull from, PvP matchmaking, OPR, expeditions, you end up feeling like you get cut off, especially in weird times, right? So like back to the previous video about how like WoW starts local and then builds, into the next level the onion, the next level the onion. And so if they do fresh start servers, if they also, for some reason, because they said they're already working on cross server play, so like it's not like they need this. They said, we know we need this, we're working on it, we'll update you whenever, as soon as it's ready. And who knows when that could be. That could be this year, it could be next year, who knows. But in that vein, we know that feature, just that alone, would actually make a fresh start server have a long life, and almost a way that you could be guaranteed that your server would actually remain after the fact, because even if it ends up having a population that's usually around 6 to 1,000 people, you're not then sitting here going like, well, I really need to go to another server so I can do this OPR or these expeditions, because people don't play during my kind of time slot in this regards.
So let's assume for a moment that every game ever made, the perfect population is 600. Let's just staple that fact in, and let's just take that as a base assumption, instead of getting hung up in the weeds on that.
Okay.
So you've got this base 600. The problem with games like this is you do this new start server. New World is not going to be for everybody. Final Fantasy 14 is not for everybody. World of Warcraft is not for everybody. Those are the 3 games we're talking about today. There is no game that is for everybody. But a lot of games are worth a try, especially during these free trial campaigns, half-price campaigns, your friend gave it to you, whatever. So you spin up a character just to give it a shot, because you don't know, is it for me, is it not? Right? You don't have the veteran knowledge that would inform that. Mm-hmm. And even if a veteran tries to tell you, they don't know you. So you give it a shot. Out of those 600, let's say 200 in whatever game we're playing, it's not for them. Mm-hmm. Now we're immediately down to 400 on that server, except that the existing 400 have continued progressing. They've continued getting better. They're higher level. They're more knowledgeable. They've formed groups. They're running dungeons or raids or PvP or whatever the content is with each other. How do you replace them? If you put 200 brand new ones in there, they're way behind. Not to mention what happens when a third of those new ones fall off. So now you've got a third tier of people. So even if you lock it into a perfect size, what happens when people just quit? Mm-hmm. People are allowed to get tired of games, want to play something else. That's not a bad thing.
In fact,
So
it's
how
a
do you
bad thing
keep
if
it at
you
that
keep them
perfect 600?
if you try to keep them locked in. I think that ends up causing bigger problems down the road, where all of a sudden you're like, okay, no, can't do
And
this.
if it's capped at 600, I've converted, I think, like 7 or 8 friends to join me in Guild Wars now.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, you can't play with me because my server's already at 600. So if you hard cap it, you have another issue. And if it's just a soft cap, well, what happens when we get to somebody who has a lot of friends, kind of, friends? And so you end up with something like, well, what happens when like an Asmongold joins a stream, joins a thing? Is it still capped at 600? So he joins a server that only has 300 on it. So now 299 immediately join.
Mm-hmm.
Now what happens when he has a legitimate friend of his or he wants to collab? Like, how does all that work? So cross server play almost feels mandatory for games like this.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Moving forward.
Yeah, I think essentially, and that's actually going to be interesting to see the lessons that AGS learns, especially for their next MMO, and say, hey, okay, these are systems, because the territory control system is a fun game, but I think that they need to look at kind of like, okay, what's the real feeling, what's the real value we can get out of that, especially when also addressing the need that people just want to play the game, like they just want to play and they don't want to have to sit here and do the thing. And maybe there's always that idea that some people do want that kind of style game, so it becomes a real big dev and honestly big problems to solve. So I'll be interested to see where AGS goes from there. Now, final question from, in this case, Sir Rule is asking, I'm kind of intrigued where Chris's thoughts on this question. Did Amazon screw up with, in his mind, with the server mergers that they actually made back in July? And so what happened ended up being is that back in July, they condensed down, putting a lot of, and the populations on the servers are great. People like playing with people. Well, what a shocker. But then all of a sudden, after they did this, that's when we're seeing all the surging and more, which is now people like, man, I wish we had all those servers still. Did AGS screw up? Were they premature on those on the server mergers?
So it's back to that. They didn't have the ability to then pull it back apart. So the problem isn't what they did in July. The problem is that they intrinsically built a game that requires a specific population on a server to remain healthy. So they're always going to want to merge, but then that game has a cap, so they're always going to want to split. So they created a game that cannot handle wide swings in player population, but then it's a subscription-free game with an inconsistent content cycle that is, while they do communicate a lot, is not predictable to the degree of like 14, where we're within like 11 days.
I do feel like
they're
that
getting
gets
better
fleshed
at it.
out.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't mean that as a dig.
Yeah,
I don't mean this as a dig. I'm not trying to like insult them. I think they've done incredible, but like a new IP is hard.
Yeah.
It's a hard problem. And they're doing a great job with it, but it's a hard problem. And so now they've created a situation where player count is going to fluctuate. And they've created a game where player count cannot fluctuate. So the merge and the split will always be a pain point because you've created a system that wants a consistent number of players and a game and community that will never be consistent. And so they're always going to be at odds because the moment something new like Greatsword gets announced, we're going to have too many people, we split the servers up. The moment everybody tries it out and we don't know when the next thing's coming, it's going to drop off. There's not enough people and we're going to have to merge again. So it's just going to keep doing that over and over. And because the system wasn't designed to constantly fracture, if it was more seasonal in the world, then every season we'd go, and this season we're splitting you apart, and this season we're merging you together. If the game had been more like, oh, there are these natural merge and split points, that would have been a little bit easier. And so you just kind of, you just lock into a guild, and as soon as you're locked into your guild, you're locked into that guild for the whole season. And then the seasons are 2 weeks, and at the end of that 2 weeks, and then your guild's just going to get assigned. It's going to balance all the servers, and then at the end of that 2 weeks, you can bail out. And I don't know, and that would have had its own problems, but it at least would have solved this problem. So I don't think it's that July was a mistake. I think it's that there's some inherent design choices they made as a game that had never released its new IP, and it's a game that's doing a lot of things that are actually kind of a new take on things. But the fact that it's borrowing a lot of ideas from different games, they've never been put together in quite this way. And so it's created a lot of problems that they couldn't have foreseen.
Right.
So I don't have any resentment. I just think that it is a problem, and it seems to be a foundational one.
Yeah, and I don't think the mergers actually in July were the wrong call. In fact, actually, I think that helped preserve a lot of player population, a lot of enjoyment on what the current player base was. But always, like even Chris said back in the day when they were just scaling up servers, is like, they're going to have to figure out this problem, and that's unfortunately going to take time. And for me though, like, it's like, okay, we're working our way through it. I'm looking forward to it. Just like within 14 didn't launch with cross server, like it was, and then eventually cross server got brought in, and then eventually World Visit got brought in, and then eventually, it's just the end eventually and eventually. And so when we look back at it in the course of years of context, yeah, like this is definitely much better. Like when they brought in the Cross World Party Finder, like holy crap, like how it just opened up content because they identified a problem in 14. Because back in that game, before, like back in Heaven's Word, I want to talk about what Cosmos is saying in our next segment when we talk about the nerfs to Savage. But in that regards, the like they found that the raiders would, like, there was a requirement of server transfer, and then there was and people would leverage the pay to win aspect. Oh, you're just, that's so YoshiP solved the problem at a financial cost, because now people aren't just transferring servers so that they can do the content. No, the content should be available to everybody who's playing. Whether you want to, if you don't want to do it, that's your choice. But it's like, it shouldn't be you actually picked the wrong server. You need to spend $15 and transfer over to this server to be a part of that. In Cross World, man, when that opened up, like all of a sudden so many things opened up, and then it revealed things like Deep Dungeon and the maps like weaknesses. So then they brought in World Visit, and now we actually have Data Center Visit. And I think we're continuing to see that technology and that design architecture always worked on, always kind of put in time. And unfortunately it does take time, because I remember when they announced Data Center Visit, it was a year late. They delivered it a year late due to server concerns, due to the launch of Endwalker and things like that, because it originally was scheduled for last summer, but we got it finally this summer. And I think that's a big thing. I think that's a good community thing. Chris, why don't you take final thoughts on this video before we take our next break and go into the third segment?
Guys, I'm excited to see any game doing well. New World, obviously a big part of that. If you guys want to come hang out with us, we are hoping to do these videos a lot more often. We're breaking them into kind of 3 parts with little breaks in between. We get to stream them. Brian gets to stream over to YouTube while I stream over to Twitch. And it's been wonderful to get to hang out with all you guys. And a special thanks at the end here to all of you that go an extra mile and support us. We've had an incredible amount of support on Twitch today, and it's astounding. So thank you guys to people who have supported us for the very first time ever, to some big long time supporters, and everybody in between. Brian and I, we've continued to put more and more time and effort into the channel regardless, but through just the way life goes, we've become more and more reliant on this. And it's incredible what you guys make possible for us. So thank you.
Thank you.